So the movie begins, and we see an elderly woman living with her ill husband. Her husband was in really poor health, and she had to look after him by herself. One day, while the old woman was busy in her room, she suddenly heard a sound from her space, so she went to check on her husband and started observing him. Out of nowhere, she heard a wolf howling from outside, which frightened her a lot. Now we notice that all the other wolves also get frightened by something and start running around making noise, and that was an evil spirit that had come into her farm. Later, while the old woman was preparing food in the kitchen, a chair behind her unexpectedly moved, making her realize that the spirit was near her. The next day, the old woman's son and daughter, named Louis, visited to check on their parents. The way the siblings spoke to their mother showed that they weren't getting along very well and lacked understanding between them. The old woman told her children they should leave the home but didn't mention that there was a terrible spirit there, lingering for many years. At night, the brother and sister sat outside the house talking, believing they would get tired. They recognized they had been so engrossed in their own lives that they hadn't noticed their parents' needs for love and attention. At night, when Louis shut the door and walked inside, the door opened by itself. She felt it was odd how it opened. There was the evil spirit that only her mother could see. While they were eating, the mother warned her son, Michael, that there wasn't anything good in their home and a lot of bad things were there, advising them to leave. However, he brushed off his mother's concerns and went to his room after dinner. When his mother was busy in the kitchen, the chair shifted again, making her cry once more. She was exhausted too, holding the knife in her hand. The next morning, when Louis and Michael arrived at the farm, they were shocked to find their mother had taken her own life. Both were very upset and removed her body, which the police later came to take away. The siblings fell into deep despair and sat quietly by their father's feet. During this time, we see their neighbor also grieving over the tragic loss of their mother. A nurse came to their house who had been caring for their father. She mentioned that their mother used to talk to herself as if she were conversing with someone. Upon hearing this, Louis thought about how tough things must have been for their parents, feeling guilty that they had left her alone then. Because of this regret, he decided to take on the responsibility of looking after his father. He went into his mother's sewing room and saw she had been making a dress for her wedding, which made him even sadder. While Louis was in the shower, he heard footsteps in the bathroom. He called out, asking Michael if he was there, but didn't get a reply. When Louis peeked behind the curtain, he saw his dad standing there in a really odd state, which frightened him. He began to tremble and shake his head. Seeing this, Louis got scared and closed his eyes while screaming. When Michael came to check, there was no one in the bathroom. When he went to look in his father's room, he found him sleeping in the same way he had before. It was hard to dismiss what Louis had actually seen, but she still pushed it aside. Michael then planned to step out for some supplies, but before leaving, he checked on his dad. Michael discovered his mother's diary beneath the bed and told Louis about it. They both started reading it, where their mother wrote about the menacing spirit and mentioned that it was slowly harming their father and that she needed help. On hearing this, Louis began to cry. They tried to connect the writings in the diary with the strange events happening in their house and couldn't understand why their mother had suddenly ended her life. In search of answers, they read the diary again, where she mentioned that she could hear that spirit's voice and sensed its presence. Then they visited the doctor who examined their mother's body. He handed them a cross, stating he found it in her pocket. This surprised both of them because their mother wasn't very religious. After that, they returned home, but their anxiety kept growing. One night when Louis was caring for his dad, he started coughing and a spider crawled out from his mouth. Louis tried to capture it, but Michael came in to see if everything was okay. Louis assured him everything was fine. When Michael went to his room to sleep, someone switched on the light. To find out who it was, he discovered their mother floating in the air, smiling at him. Then the light in Michael's room turned off, and he began to hear their mother's voice from within the room. When he looked outside, she was nowhere to be seen. He realized she was there, appearing as though she was hanging. When Michael turned the light back on, no one was present. He had a mark on his face and started wiping his mouth. When she went to check on her dad, she noticed lipstick, which disturbed her a lot. Meanwhile, someone called their home, and when Louis answered it, he heard a recorded message. When she answered the phone, she heard her mom's voice. When Michael returned, he noticed his dad outside the house. He was already aware of Louis and Michael. He informs them that his mom used to visit him. "That's how I recognize you." He provides them his number and tells them to reach out if they require assistance. He suspects that his mom could have. That is why Michael requests him to go. After he departs, Michael contacts his wife and children and tells them that he misses them and wishes to reunite with them. When Louis goes through his mom's diary, he hears a glass breaking. Louis assumes that Michael might have broken something. But he can see the dark figure. Louis believes that his mom was correct. He informs Michael. He thinks that he is correct. He tells Louis about the evening when he witnessed his mom flying. When they entered, they discovered someone was outside. They saw their father outside. He saw his eyes. They recognized it was Michael. He can take on anyone's appearance. His neighbor calls to assist Louis and Michael. But the neighbor is attacked because he attempted to help them. The spirit arrives at the neighbor's house as Louis and starts cutting his body and face with a knife right before him. As soon as the neighbor saw him, he realized this isn't the real Louis. Now the spirit comes to the neighbor and starts whispering in his ear. The next moment the neighbor shoots himself and ends it. In this way, this spirit compels anyone to end their life through hypnosis. Just like he did with his mother previously and now with the neighbor as well. The following morning, the two siblings exit the house to check for their father's footprints, to determine if he came last night or if what they think about the spirit is true. So these people find nothing there. Now, due to the situation at home, both agree to take their dad to the hospital. Louis calls his father to ask about his mother. Then the father asks, "Where did you find my number?" Louis responds, "You provided it when you visited our house and mentioned you knew our mother, and that she used to visit you." Upon hearing this, the father was shocked. He says, "I have never met your mother and I live in another country. I don't know any of you." Moreover, the father reveals that he also had a daughter named Louis who ended her life. Coincidentally, her voice sounds a lot like yours. Hearing this made her very uneasy and she quickly hung up the phone because she felt dizzy from everything. Regardless, now the two consult a physician to arrange for their father to go to the hospital. Seeing the father's condition, the doctor remarks that he is extremely weak. Who knows, he may not endure the strain of travel. If his life could be at risk, it's better to keep him at home. Now the father's nurse says that your father needs your affection and I hope he will recover this way. Because I observed your mother suffering without both of you. Now when Louis and Michael arrive at the farm, they faint. There were a lot of dead animals lying around, which were torn apart and consumed. They realized that this couldn't be caused by any wolf. They suspected the spirit. And now she would ignite a large flame, toss all the animals into it and burn them. Now because of this situation, Michael became very emotional. The pregnant animal, when he approached to speak with her, he stated that he would not allow anything to happen to her. And because he was emotional about his father and sister, he decided to remain with them. He also informs Louis that he is now terrified of these occurrences. After some time, Michael hears someone's voice from the farm. When he went to investigate, the evil spirit appeared in the form of his mother. She began whispering something in Michael's ear. As a result, he was also going to end it with a knife like his neighbor and his mother. But then he restrained himself with his willpower. When Louis was sleeping with his father at night, he experienced a nightmare, in which he sensed the dark spirit around him, which suddenly frightened him. And now when he went to check, his father was gone. In fact, he was stuck to the roof, which made him extremely anxious. And now his eyes opened while screaming. That was also part of his terrifying dream. When morning came, Michael could not find him anywhere. He began searching for him everywhere. In truth, he had escaped from his father and sister to protect himself. And now Louis feels terrible about this. Then the neighbor's granddaughter visits Louis. She tells Louis about her death and mentions that your father can hear. Hearing this, Louis realizes that she isn't the actual neighbor's granddaughter. In fact, this time too, the spirit has transformed and come to her. And she began disturbing Louis. Ignoring her, Louis calls Michael. Meanwhile, the father's nurse also arrived here. The two sisters were disputing when the nurse began inserting a sharp object into her cheek. Seeing this, Louis panicked. She rushed to stop her, but the nurse rendered her unconscious. And now she inflicts injuries on her nose and various parts of her body and ruthlessly ends her life. When Michael arrived to see his wife and children, he found himself utterly devastated, realizing that all his family members had passed away. Overwhelmed by grief, Michael decides to end his life by cutting his throat. However, in his final moments, he perceives that his family is actually alive. This was all a plot by a spirit to ensure that Michael would also lose his life. While Louis was with his father, he began to cough violently. At that moment, Louis heard Michael's voice coming from the house, and simultaneously, his father's health worsened. Louis became quite anxious. She attempted to help her father, but his coughing was so intense that he ultimately lost his breath. In her sorrow, as Louis wept, she then heard her mother's voice from within the house. When she turned to look for her, the spirit emerged from her father and took Louis's life as well. Consequently, the entire family had plunged into the depths of death. The reason behind this tragedy was that their mother had vowed to surrender all their souls to Satan to fulfill her own goals. Thus, the spirit remained within her husband and took root in their home. After that, it caused the demise of the entire family. Anyone associated with him also met the same fate. And with that, the tale of this film concludes here.